That's the actual sound of Voyager, is it?
That's part of the recording that's on the Voyager spacecraft.
So what is it? Just
It's a bunch of guys at Yale University put into sound the way that the individual planets move. So each tone corresponded to the motion of one planet. You heard them all together. It's sort of the music of the spheres.
Do not the orbits of the Earth change? Don't all orbits change?
Wait long enough, but the orbits in the solar system right now are remarkably stable. They tend to be very circular.
But you do get a degree, you know, or
a little bit, and in fact, even a little change can affect the climate.
Right, but but the Earth is not the universe is not an exact movement of planets day after day after day.
Well, it's not easy to follow the motions. The motions can be very complex. If you just have two bodies, then the motion is perfectly regular and determined by the laws of physics that Isaac Newton first wrote down. But if you have lots of objects, maybe the motions are still well determined, but they're so complex that nobody can predict in detail what it will be like. The more objects you have gravitationally interacting, the more complex it gets.
Yes,
I want to ask a question about the rings. That Jupiter has it as well as Saturn. What are they made of, and why do those planets have them where the others don't?
You see, it used to be that we thought only Saturn had rings, and then we said, well, why only Saturn? What's special about that? Then we discovered that Uranus has rings. Now we discovered that Jupiter has rings. So it's getting to look like it's a sort of common thing. There are two general explanations where the rings come from. One is that the gravity of a planet like Jupiter prevented small particles falling together to make a moon a long time ago. The other is that a moon wandered too close and was torn apart by the gravity of Jupiter. And since those planets are the biggest planets with the largest gravity, they have the biggest ability to tear worlds apart. So it makes sense that they should have rings if any planet should.
back here, Carl.
Mr. Sagan, with all the problems with overpopulation and the energy crisis, what planets would be most suitable, possibly in the future, for colonization or for mining?
On the Earth today, there are several 100,000 more people being born than dying every day.
Several 100,000?
That's right.
300,000?
2 or 3. Therefore, the idea of solving the population so-called problem by spaceflight means shipping 200,000 people into space every day, and you can see that that doesn't sound like a likely solution to the problem, at least for the next few decades or centuries.
But in the moral sense, it at least would be useful to wonder how different that would be than what's happening to the boat people.
I think it would be a marvelous adventure to be a colonist on another planet. I think it would be great.
I'm merely saying that if the inequality of life and death, that is to say, with more people being born than dying, one of the consequences is the refugee problem, which is very significant and pervades.
My view is that the resources on the planet Earth at the present time are perfectly adequate to give a very reasonable and happy life to all of the 4.2 billion people on the planet. The trouble is that some countries have a great deal of the wealth of the planet, and other countries have very little of the wealth.
So the problem is political and not ecological?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, you showed us a replica of Voyager. How large is it really?
Yeah, this is a 1/10 scale model. So the real spacecraft is 10 times this, which means that it's a little bigger than the whole space on this stage. It's a big robot.
Yes.
Comment and a question, very briefly. I wanted to thank you on behalf of those people and the general public that have had an opportunity to read any of your books. I find them extremely interesting and lively and very readable.
Thank you.
And my question is, I've got a hunch that you'd be thrilled to death to be able to participate in orbital flight sometime in your career, and I wondered if this was indeed the case, and if NASA has approached you with an opportunity such as this, and what kind of research you'd like to do if the opportunity arises.
Thank you. Well, my general sense is that it would be fun to be an astronaut if astronauts went anywhere interesting. But astronauts, by and large, just stay in Earth orbit, or they used to go to the moon before that was decided to be too expensive. And the moon is, in my view, a very dull place compared to sort of all the other lovely places. And so if Mars were in orbit around the Earth, or Io, then I'd love to be an astronaut. The cost of manned exploration of the planets is so large, hundreds of billions of dollars, that I just don't think we're going to have that in the near future. So I certainly, would think seriously if I were offered a chance to spend a week in Earth orbit looking down at our lovely planet. That would be fun. But in terms of real fundamental pursuit of my scientific interests, I guess I'm stuck to using robots to go to planets to send me information about what they find out.
On this, the 10th anniversary year of the landing of Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon, may we have your... Are we to understand then from your comments that that was a theatrical exercise and a
political exercise? It was a response to the Bay of Pigs disaster in Cuba and the first orbital flight of Yuri Gagarin. It was a response to the Russians. It was not basically, fundamentally, a scientific enterprise. It was a political enterprise, maybe a valid one, but it shouldn't be charged to the scientists. Another way of calibrating that is that the last man to land on the moon was the first scientist to land on the moon. The moment the scientists got there, they say, oh, we're wasting our time, let's stop this program.
Who was that, Schmidt?
Yeah, Jack Schmidt, who's now a senator from New Mexico. Unemployed in the astronaut corps, had to find another job.
But did we have the scientific community saying as much? At the time, we were all rah-rah, let's go?
A lot of it. I mean, I was in the peculiar position of opposing the beginning of the Apollo program and opposing the end of the Apollo program. It sounds crazy, but I opposed the beginning of it because I thought we could, for much less money, send robots to find out.
Right. But you must at least have to wonder where we could have been now if we had diverted that Apollo money into unmanned exploration.
Exactly. If we had done that, I think we would have roving vehicles wandering over the surface of Mars, landers on the Galilean satellites, entry probes into the atmosphere of Jupiter, flyby spacecraft on their way to Neptune and Pluto. We would have had a preliminary reconnaissance of the entire solar system. It's still possible to do that. We have the opportunity to explore this entire solar system by the end of this decade, the end of this century, if we were willing to commit very small resources. The cost of, let's say, one nuclear submarine would do it just fine.
Carl Sagan returns in a moment.